Hi everyone, welcome back to Dimitra's Dishes. So I'm so happy to be bringing you this recipe today because it's one of my all-time favorite holiday desserts. I'm going to be teaching you how to make my ultimate apple pie. We sold hundreds of these, if not thousands at the restaurant, definitely thousands. And this is the same exact recipe we're using. We're going to go over the apple filling ingredients because that's what we're making first. All of these steps and all of the components of this recipe can all be made ahead of time, so it's really easy to put together and not stress about it at for your holiday table. Now, I'm using Granny Smith apples. I peeled and cored and sliced about 10 or 11 Granny Smith apples to they're 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch in thickness. So that's here in these two bowls, and I have them in cold water with some sliced lemons in there just to keep them from turning brown. I have some light brown sugar, some granulated sugar, a heaping tablespoon of cinnamon because I love the spice that it adds, and then a little bit of salt and some cornstarch, also known as corn flour. And in my pan, I have a stick of butter that's melting. I'm using a shallow, wide pan, just that way everything cooks evenly and the juices kind of evaporate as they go. I'm gonna strain out the water from these apples, and I'm gonna add them to my pan. Now I'm just gonna mix up all of the sugar and corn flour and salt and the cinnamon. And then I'm going to add it to the pot. So it takes about 10 minutes over medium-high heat for the apple pie filling to cook. The apples are going to begin to cook down, and you do not want to move away from the pan while this is happening because it can burn because there's that cornstarch in there. So you're going to just want to gently stir it and mix it up so that way everything gets combined. Being careful not to break up the apples if you can. And then you're just gonna cook this until the liquids are released and that sauce begins to thicken. So once it begins to boil and it thickens just a little bit, it's ready. We're not looking for fully cooked apples because they're also gonna bake in the oven. Once it's done, you wanna set it aside and let it cool completely. And then you could either use it right away in your pie, or you could store it for 2 weeks in the refrigerator, and it's great in this pie, in strudels. I'll link some recipes up on top, and it's even delicious with ice cream or oatmeal. So make this recipe and have some on hand. I'm gonna set this aside to cool, and then we're gonna move on to making our crust. So there are two components to the crust. There are actually two different recipes for the crust. For the bottom crust, I made a cream cheese pastry, which is my go-to pie dough recipe all the time. This is what I use. It's so easy to make. I made it so many times. All I did was combine some butter and cream cheese in my tabletop mixer, and then I mixed it until it was really nice and fluffy. Then I just added the flour and let it beat until it came together and formed a dough. Wrap it in parchment paper or plastic, and you could store it in your freezer or in your refrigerator. If you're using it right away, refrigerate it and chill it for a good 30 minutes so that way everything can set and it's easy to roll out. If you're not using it right away, you can make it way ahead of time. Really, you could do this a month ahead of time if it's wrapped properly. If you're gonna store it in your freezer for making it way ahead of time, like say you're making it for Christmas or something, or New Year's, then just wrap it in parchment paper, then wrap that in foil, and then another time in plastic, and it'll be airtight in your freezer, good to go. But really 2 weeks is probably what I recommend, 2 weeks ahead of time. And the top crust is gonna be shortbread. So I love the depth of flavor that all the different textures are going to add. The bottom crust does not have any sugar at all, but it's very tender and rich. The shortbread cookie top, well, it's a shortbread cookie, and it's just going to be so buttery and crisp and delicious. To make the shortbread dough, all I did was I combined butter, sugar, a little bit of salt, and vanilla extract in my tabletop mixer. I mixed it on high speed until it was nice and fluffy, added the flour, and kept mixing it until a dough was formed. Then you can do the same thing that you did with the cream cheese pastry. You wrap it in parchment paper if you're using it that same day. Chill it just for a little while, maybe about 20 minutes just so it could set and it's really easy to roll out. Or wrap it tightly with parchment and plastic and keep it ready to go in your freezer. They're delicious doughs to have on hand because you can make so many yummy recipes with these doughs. But we're going to begin by rolling out our cream cheese pastry to make our bottom crust. So I'm just going to take a little ball of dough out, about a 5 ounce, I should say, ball of dough because this is going to make the decorations that I'm going to make that I'm going to add to my pie crust on top. I'm going to make little leaves. That's a little too big. About a baseball size ball of dough. That's about the size of it. If you have a kitchen scale, just you can take it out and use it. And just we're going to set that aside, and we're going to make decorations for our pie crust, but we'll do that in a little bit. I'm going to form this into a circle. Doesn't have to be perfect, really. Just like that. And then I'm just going to dust a little bit of all-purpose flour on my work surface. And I'm going to roll this out a little bit bigger than my pie pan. And as you're rolling it out, you want to turn, roll and turn, roll and turn, and that keeps it circular. And if the shape starts to get a little bit stretched out, you could just push it back together and form it into a circle. Be very light with the all-purpose flour, because the more flour you add, the tougher the dough gets, and you want it to stay really nice and tender. And this is how you check. You can put your pan in the center of the dough, and if it goes all the way up the sides, that's how you know it's ready. I'm just going to roll it out just a little bit wider because I like to have a little extra just to be sure. And to transfer it onto the pan, you just roll it, you fold it in half. You bring the pan towards you, the pie plate, and then you just put it in there just like that. Make sure press it in so that way it can get tucked in. Now at this point, you could just leave it just as is and trim the edges and just press it down. Or you can make a nice fluted edge by folding over the excess dough, just like we're doing. And then just take your fingers and press them in the dough just like that. It creates that shape, creates this really pretty design. Again, this is not necessary because we are making pretty embellishments with the extra pie dough that we've set aside. But I just like to go all out when I'm making this holiday pie. I like to make it as pretty as possible from start to finish. It doesn't take much time or effort, just a little extra step makes such a huge difference. Now I'm going to take this pie, keep it in my freezer until it firms. It's going to stay in there for about 30 minutes or so, just until I roll out all the rest of my embellishments. And you can do this step at least a week ahead of time too. Once it chills and sets in the freezer, you can just wrap it in plastic wrap and leave it in there for a week at least until you're ready to bake your pie. I have these little cookie cutters that have a little stamp to them that create a beautiful embellishment on the pie decorations that we're going to make. I'll put the link down below where you could get them, but you could get them in most kitchen supply stores. Now I have all different shapes, but I like to stick with one. So I'll use this leaf right here. So we're just going to roll this out, and then you take your little cookie cutter or your leaf cutter and you press it down, and then you press the stamp part down just so you can embellish it and create that beautiful, elegant design. And then you're just going to pop it out onto the baking tray, and look at that beautiful leaf. It's just perfect. It's going to be so pretty. If they start to get stuck, you can dip this in all-purpose flour and then just keep cutting out the little leaf shapes and putting them on the tray with parchment paper until you're done. This makes about 30 leaves or so. So our leaf cutouts are ready. You can also make these a good few weeks ahead of time and keep them stored in your freezer, and they'll be ready and good to go. So now I'm going to take my chilled apple pie filling, or it's really not chilled, it just cooled down and it's at room temperature. Now you see how the liquid in this, the sauce, it almost looks like a caramel sauce. It's still runny, but it's thick. If yours, it's happened to me many times where the sauce has cooked a little bit longer than it should have, or that I was a little heavy-handed with the cornstarch, and then I got little kind of like clumpy, almost jello-y type of a consistency, where really what that means is that the sauce became a little too thick. If that happens to you, you can easily fix it by adding a little bit of either heavy cream or some water. So you could do about a quarter cup or so of heavy cream, mix it really well until it thins it out a little bit while it's still warm in the pan. But if it happens to cool down and that happened to it, just go ahead and pour some warm heavy cream over it. And this is what it should look like. If you have more apples than this, do not overstuff your pie shell, because then the top part will slide off. The top crust will slide off while baking, and then that won't be good. But this is what it needs to look like. Once it cooks in the oven, they're going to cook down a little bit more, and the juices are going to thicken a little more, and it's just going to be so delicious. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to set these leaves aside for a little bit, and we're going to roll out the top crust, which is our shortbread cookie dough. I'm just going to sprinkle some all-purpose flour on my workboard and on top, and I'm just going to roll this out to about 12 to 14 inches in diameter. And if it crumbles, it doesn't matter. You know what? This is not going to be that perfect top. It's going to look really rustic and beautiful, and at the end it is going to look really perfect, but it's going to look like a little bit of a mess when you're working with it. It's going to break up on you. Don't worry at all if that happens. You'll see why in a few seconds. I love this dough because if it breaks, you can just press it back together. There we go. What you're looking for is wide enough or big enough, the circle big enough to cover the top of the pie. So if I was to try to lift this whole thing up, it would fall apart. So I'm going to cut it in half, and you might even need to cut it in quarters because it does crumble. And I'm going to take it, and if it breaks, you don't worry about it at all. Not at all. You just take that piece, and it will not even show at the end. And you know what? I'm going to cut this half in half, and you could do that. You can cut all of it in quarters and put it on top like that. Trust me when I tell you that in the end, it's going to look beautiful. Now tuck in all of the pieces of shortbread in those fluted edges of the crust, the bottom crust, just like that. Now we're going to take our leaves, and I have some egg wash here. I have 1 egg yolk with a little bit of water that I've just mixed together, and I'm just going to brush a little bit on the back of each leaf, and I'm going to place them on the edge of the pie, just like this, overlapping them a little bit, and it's going to look like a crown of leaves all around the edge of the pie. It's going to look so beautiful. So we formed a beautiful crown of leaves around the pie, and I do have some leaves left over. So I'm just going to create little clusters on just a few of the sides just to add some dimension and beauty to this. And you just, wherever you want to, you can make little groups of maybe 2 or 3 leaves. Maybe you can even make one appear as if it's falling off the pie, hanging off, not falling off, just like that. Maybe 1 more on that little edge. Just makes it look really pretty. That looks really pretty. And then I had this little piece left over. I'll just stick it over here. You don't have to. You can just leave it out. But why waste? There you have it. Now I'm just going to cut a few slits just so that way the steam can escape from the apple pie filling once it starts to cook in the oven. About 5 should be good. And then we're going to sprinkle some granulated sugar on top of the shortbread. You can also do it on top of the leaves. Look at that. Now we're just going to cover this in foil. So I have 2 pieces of foil. I'm just going to cut a little hole in the center just so that way the steam can escape. And I'm just going to cover the pie all around because this is going to bake in the oven for quite a while. And I don't want the crust to become too brown. There we have it. Be careful not to squish all of the decorations that you've just created. My oven is preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and I also have my baking stone in there that lives in my oven all the time. I have it in there all the time, and if you have a baking stone, just put it in there and let it preheat in the oven. That's going to help the bottom crust cook really evenly. And you want to make sure that you set your pie pan on a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, so that way if any of the sauce drips over, it'll drip into your pan and not in your oven. I'm going to pop this in, and I'm going to show you what this looks like when it's ready. Just take a look at how beautiful this apple pie is. It's just, first of all, gigantic. Second, the leaf embellishments that we made on there are just beautiful. They just make all the difference in how beautiful this looks. This is going to be a showstopper at your holiday table. Now what I did, I baked it at 425 degrees for 20 minutes, covered in foil. Then I reduced the temperature to 350 degrees, and then I let it bake for 30 more minutes. Then I took it out of the oven, and I carefully peeled off like a circle of foil where the center is, keeping the edges of the pie where the leaves are covered, because that not only supports the pie and keeps it together, but it keeps the leaves, the leaves on the outer edges from browning too fast. And for some reason, those brown much faster than the center. So I left it on until the pie was beautifully golden. And the last 10-15 minutes, I just went in and took off all the foil so that way it can brown evenly. But you can leave the foil on the whole baking time and just keep an eye on it, and when the center is golden you can pull it out, and if you think that it needs a little more time, just pop it in. Every oven is different, so the baking times will vary, but I did give you an idea of how long it'll take on the recipe. You can find the recipe always in the description box down below and on the website, dimitrasdishes.com. This is going to be such a delicious dessert to serve at your holiday table. The only thing is, once it comes out of the oven, you want to let it set. So leave it alone and let it sit at room temperature for at least an hour, because the juices will kind of settle and then it'll be much easier to cut into. Otherwise, it's going to start falling apart on you and you won't be able to get really nice, neat slices out of it. You can make this the day before you're serving it and then just warm it through in the oven at about 325 degrees for about 15 minutes, just until it warms through, and then your house will smell lovely as well. Serve this with some homemade whipped cream or some ice cream and you will be in dessert heaven. I hope you make it. I hope you enjoy it. Share pictures with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.